started. This is one of my most. This is a topic is very, very dear to me. This one and the next one on sponsorship. And the reason is because not everybody in DEI speaks about the role of access and opportunity. So let's get right into it. A couple things, live transcripts are there. So please, if you want to activate it, do so. If you don't and you find it distracting, feel free to take that out. I always start collective breath in, collective breath out. I shared a tip sheet. You may notice that some classes have tip sheets and some don't. My goal here is not to inundate you or overwhelm you. It's really if we do a group brainstorm or we have something that we weren't able to go through collectively in the 60 to 90 minutes that we have together, I want to make sure I share that with you. So Chantel has asked a few times, and this is on me for not providing this earlier, but for a non-biased promotional review template, I wanted to share, number one, there was a great Harvard Business Review article about how one company in particular worked to root out bias from their performance reviews. So I'm going to share that. And one of my colleagues, Katrina Jones, a wonderful practitioner, is both in the DEI space and in the HR space. She shared with me an actual template that I will share with the class afterwards. So I will make sure that that's shared with you as a resource. A couple other things. A couple people were asking about how we protect intellectual property. When you do your assignments, I want to let you know that the people that do have access to it is myself and then the elevator team, and nobody else has access to it. It's protected. We're working on a statement, and I'm grateful to the person who brought this up because some of us have interviewed for roles in DEI, and we share our ideas. And when we share our ideas, we want to know that they're not just going to be shared. And there are groups specifically, a lot of my Black colleagues whose work has not been valued and credited the way it should. So I want to make sure that we do the due diligence there. Okay, lastly, before we go further, I just want to say for those of you who have turned in assignments, I've been really impressed with what I've been reading. You're bringing a level of nuance to your work. You're bringing yourself to this work. I'm seeing that, pieces of yourself. And I also am noticing that your mind is stretching. I can't say where your mind was before in this work, but I see the bringing in of identities that perhaps you do or you don't have personal experience or are within your network, but keep that up, because I think that if I try to put myself in the seat of a manager or a leader when I'm reading this, and it's very convincing what you're doing. So keep that up, and I think that the work is going great so far. All right, so we are on our fourth class, the role of access and opportunity in success. And we have here our DEI values. So for those of you that are from Canada, you may be familiar with the the Centre of Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH. It's in Toronto on Queen Street West. When I went there one day, I noticed that there was a plaque on the wall by the elevator, and it had these values. And the reason I share these values is because they're foundational to the work. And so if you're finding yourself in this role, I would encourage you to create your own values and consider putting them in a place where people can revisit them passively even, right? It's not something that you do and then you shelve away. You want it in a place where visibly we can revisit it and say, oh yeah, we're losing sight of this, or, oh yeah, we need to do more of this. It's a reminder and a unifying way to get people to do the work from a place of principles. So I'm just sharing that because I think you may have seen the slide a couple times, and you're going to keep seeing it because I want to make sure that we're grounded in these 5 principles or values. So we have our house rules here. You're familiar with them at this point. I don't feel like I need to read them out, but if I see one of these happening, I'll make sure that we center ourselves again to make sure we're being as inclusive as possible. Okay, so here we have our house questions. If you remember, I have started putting a little asterisk next to the middle question, which is how can we be more inclusive? And what I'm doing moving forward is I am creating this slide, and I'll explain it as our best practices from the class before. So let me slow this down a little bit. In our last class, we spoke about the talent life cycle. Each of these letters is an acronym. So the first R is recruiting, O is onboarding, T and D is training and development, the second R is retention, and the fifth letter E is for exit. And we broke out into groups, and I collected some of the best practices here, so we have something to attach to every part of the cycle. So for recruiting, we had, thank you to you all for coming up with this idea, expand your sourcing networks and have diverse hiring panels. The reason I chose this one is because it's rooted in organizational change. It's not something that one person does, it's something that you can implement organizational wide. Whether your organization is 10 people, or in the case of the employer that I had, which was 1.3 million, you can make a policy or a practice out of it. And that's where I want to challenge us to go. For onboarding, thank you again to groups 3 and 4, offer accessible services and make a DEI commitment. So initially I came up with the idea to share a DEI statement, but you all really rightfully challenged me that if you're not doing this work, then don't make a statement about a work you're not doing. What you can do is say where you are in the journey and commit to this work. So that's, again, an organizational best practice that can move the needle on DEI. Training and development. The best practice we have here is allocating a professional learning budget per employee. And I'm actually going to give you a number. In a lot of organizations, there is a budget of starting, depending on the size of the organization and whether it's profit or nonprofit, but speaking from the perspective of a profitable organization, we have upwards of about $2,000 per employee allocated for training and development. Not everybody knows this, but if you are asking for it and you have a case around it, you can likely get some degree of that. So what we can do is we can be transparent about this budget. We can say in the onboarding perhaps, or when people are on teams, like, if you feel like you want upskilling in a particular area, here's your budget, seek out a program or something that you are training that you are interested in embarking on, and we can see if we can make it happen. So I see some questions coming up in the chat. I have a question, thank you Veronica, on training and development. I'm curious around equity, about equity around training and development. Happy to share example here. Yes, that would be wonderful. If you don't mind using the chat, I'll make a note of that in our Q&A. If we have time, we would love to hear from you. Otherwise, definitely let's use the Discord channel to go deeper into that. Your question, I want to open that up to the last 15 minutes. After Fatima, we can come to, and please, I would love to hear your question and we can answer it as a group. Okay, so a couple other questions coming up in the chat. Does anyone have suggestions for headhunters, recruiters specializing in marginalized communities? Julie, great use of the chat. I'm sure other people do. I would highly recommend, if anybody in the group has a suggestion, to drop it in there. I think it begins with finding out what kind of community is underrepresented in your organization, and then the answers can come a little bit more easily. For example, if we're looking for people to recruit people that are from the LGBTQ community because we don't have representation there, we want to reach out to recruiters that are part of that community. Okay, so our fourth letter here is retention. But before we do that, I wanted to drop in a poll, and it's specifically about the word retention. So let me see if I can, here we go. So this is, let me just move this out of the way. This is slide 6. Okay, so here's the question. It's, how do you feel about the word retention? seconds. And here are the results. Okay, we have a lot of people saying neutral, but we have some people saying it doesn't sit well with me. The reason I put this poll up was because I have heard, and I actually am in agreement with this, that the language we use around recruiting can be challenged. If you think about the word retention, it in a lot of ways can imply that we're keeping someone, we're holding someone, we're retaining them. And in a lot of ways, it can also maybe bring up images of somebody being in, somebody having ownership over somebody. And I think we can challenge that a little bit. I'm not sure what word we can replace it with, but as you do inclusion across the talent life cycle, I think we can also, as a best practice, challenge the language that we use, right? Is it ableist language? Is it language that sits well with the communities that we're trying to bring into our organization? Is exiting the right word too, or is that sort of a dismissive word? So I don't have a real strong response to what we would replace this word with, but I think this would be an amazing opportunity for the HR folks in our group to maybe see if they have some suggestive language instead. Okay, so the last letter here is E, another wonderful suggestion that I wouldn't have come up with on my own, and that's have leaders listen and loop back to the recruitment stage, which is key because what we're trying to do here is not create a line, but create a circle. All right. So our class agenda for today, we're going to look at 5 things. I want to use the chat for our icebreaker. And the question that I have for you in one word, if possible, is what does success mean to you? Thank you for kicking us off, Donna. All right, so as we see the responses coming in, what we're not seeing is people just using the word work. People have different definitions of success, and as we embark on this particular topic, we want to keep that in mind. That what we want to do is create an opportunity for people to succeed in a way that they define success. We don't want to limit it to an imposed definition of success. And so the 5 things that we're going to go through today is equity before meritocracy, the savior complex, entry level to the C-suite, and I have 2 slides there, the pie model, and then scarcity versus abundance. And I also wanted to give you a quick overview of what our workshop will be. Last week, we used Amazon as our workshop and how they were collecting data around people that they were hiring, but not people that they were leaving. This session will be on Accenture. Accenture is a company that started and scaled a return to work program with a focus on mothers. And my ask for you when we do this workshop is what is one policy we can create to increase access and exposure for marginalized groups. So we'll get to that stage when we do, but something you may want to think about, again, thinking in terms of policies and practices and how to break that organizational bias. Okay, so we have our land acknowledgement slide. Again, I stand on the sacred land of the Duwamish people, and I encourage you to use this website and share it. And as we're on the slide, I want to encourage you to think about how we can create opportunities and remove barriers for Indigenous people. So we want to go beyond just sharing these slides. We want to actually do something and embed it into our DEI work. Okay, so very quickly, our review of last class. We talked about the 5 stages of the talent life cycle. Nate, I believe it was you. I may be mistaken, so I apologize, but I think you were also mentioning succession planning. The 5 stages that I brought up are just one version of this. There's different versions of the talent life cycle, but overall talent life cycle is a holistic view of the critical stages of an employee's time within an organization. And we also spoke about the objectivity myth, that we are not bias free. We have our biases. And what we want to do, instead of focusing on do we have bias, do we not have bias, is understanding that a lot of our organizations are built on bias, and how can we interrupt these biases. We talked about, the 6 benefits of tackling bias, and how bias shows up a lot in hiring and promotion. So these are the particular areas where we want to disrupt more than others. And then we spoke about wage discrimination, and how, again, coming back to our second class, it's important to take an intersectional lens to this, and not just say that women perhaps are earning less than men, but what does that look like across different identities. And then finally, we ended with anonymity, and I put out a poll that was there to ask you, would you feel safe answering questions at work? And the takeaway was, a lot of you said you would be, depending on the environment in which we're functioning. So before we jump into the success piece, I just want to add another little poll here to get, just feedback from you as to which one of these parts of last session really stood out for you or really resonated with you. All right, so we're seeing different responses come in. But the 5 stages of the talent life cycle is one of the highest ones. I actually wrote a tweet after our class about how DEI work is about doing, making sure we're having policies and practices across the talent life cycle. And a number of people really appreciated that. So I think that's something that we can really continue to do, is not just focus on the hiring stage, but extend to the other 4 stages as well. All right, so let's jump in. Let's talk success. So I asked you what your definition of success is. There's a great pie chart image out there that says a lot of us are told that success is just work and salary, but in reality, it's a combination of mental health, balance, a choice, and a number of other different things, including pay and compensation and being credited. For those of you who may not know, famous celebrity Kim Kardashian said something in the past couple weeks about how her best advice for women in business is to get up and work, and it seems that people don't work these days. This is an example of a lot of what we hear in our workplaces, that if you build, it will come. But I'm sure a lot of us know this from personal experiences. We have a number of people with different titles and credentials in our space here together as a collective. Often you have people that have done every single thing right, from the education, the degrees, the experience, the everything, and they very often find themselves in very familiar places to those that have not done those things. So we need to come up with a different way to have this conversation. And I would tell you that the answer is in access. Some of you may have seen this image. It is by a Swedish cartoonist by the name of Amanu. And you have 2 starting lines here, and you can see in one there's a number of barriers along the way, and then the caption at the bottom is, what's the matter? It's the same distance. And what I want to say here is that we can really look at this from a different lens as well, and apply it to different scenarios: people with disabilities, people from the LGBTQ community, misogynoir, which is hatred against Black women in particular, and not just women, which is misogyny. So I would really challenge us to look at this image and see how it impacts different groups. And I want to give you some in real life practices. So if we look at an unequal starting point, for example, if you have a name that your workplace, someone has said that it's hard to pronounce, a good organizational practice to create more of an equal or fair starting point is to develop a tool where people can phonetically share the pronunciation of their name, so that people no longer have an excuse for not using their name. LinkedIn has done this, and a lot of organizations internally have done this. Hair discrimination. The Crown Law rule just came out recently. This is another example of a policy that we can put in place so that it's not left up to the individual to determine how we deal with biases. It's baked into the organization or society or in our laws. Another example is age. For those of us who have faced biases, organizational biases through age, we can say that we are going to blank out the years that people went to school within our recruiting systems so that people don't feel like we need a marker for age. And there's a lot of other ones. Another great one is giving people the like a budget to be able to get the technological tools they need to do the work. So not all of us have the privilege of having computers and screens and workplaces. So giving organizationally wide people access to perhaps WeWork areas or co-working spaces where they can come in and not have to pay, paying for their phone bills, paying for their cell phone bills that they use for work, paying for their their extra computer screen or whatever it is. These are examples that we can use in real life to move the needle away from the individual and then to move it to what we can do organizationally. Okay, so this is a very, very important slide. It was pulled from McKinsey and Company in a report that was shared called Women in the Workplace. Again, the reason why you may see a lot of this data collected around race is because these are one of the areas that we are allowed to collect data on in the workplace. That does not mean that your workplace is limited to collecting data in other areas, but the best practice around here is to invite people to self-identify, and then you can use that information to see where the gaps are. But in the US, we have something called EEO, and that helps us collect census data on what people's race is as well as gender. So what we see here is that in the first bar at the entry level, we have white men at 35%, and then at the C-suite, you see that number increases to 68%. So you can see that they grow in terms of their promotions within the organization, as in like they have a pathway. And then comparatively, if you look at women of color, you see 18% entry level, and then by the time you get to the C-suite, which is the last bar, you're at 4%. These are examples of data images that you can use to prove a point. But again, I want to challenge us to say we're not getting the full picture here. We can go beyond this and dive a little bit deeper. And this is exactly what I mean. So in this slide, we see that women of color has been further broken down into different groups. We often hear the term women of color lumping in a number of people from different identities, but you can see that those that have an orange box in them have reported a worse experience of getting support from managers in the workplace in terms of access. And Black women consistently have shown that they have this experience, from navigating organizational politics to helping their career paths being managed. But in all of these 6 examples on the left-hand side, they refer to access and opportunity. And this is from Lean In, the State of Black Women in Corporate America. So I would encourage you to check that out. And again, see how we can dive a little bit deeper into other identities as well. So we're not just looking at race and gender, but who else is being impacted between the entry level and C-suite. So as we go further, start thinking about the organizational practices. A couple that come to mind for me, and remember, we're trying to do a gear shift, right? So we're trying to create we're trying to create opportunities, and we're trying to remove barriers at the same time. So some examples of creating opportunities are stretch projects. For those who may not know, a stretch project is an example of a project that allows you to grow. You're not just doing what you are skilled at doing, you're growing your skill set. Another example is job shadowing. I ask leaders this all the time. Oh, I'm at a table of influence. I say, why don't you bring somebody with you, right? If you're invited to a panel, why don't you invite somebody with you? there's no reason why we shouldn't have job shadowing within the workplace. An example of a barrier that we can remove is an ombudsman line. So for those of you that don't know, an ombudsman line is a phone number that people can call. It's sort of like an ethics hotline where people can call, they can report their experience within the workplace, and somebody is delegated to look at that experience or examine what happened. It's an opportunity for us to report discrimination in a fair way. Another best practice is to set up a system where people within the workplace are not just answerable to their manager, but to their skip manager. So if the person above you is somebody that you may have some challenges with, you have an opportunity to report to somebody above them or around them. Again, it needs to be baked into the organizational policy, so no one is seen as, or, there's no fear of retaliation because they go around the manager. And then another best,
just to repeat, you said ombudsman?
Ombudsman, yes. I will put it here. It's a tough word, so I'm glad you asked because not everybody would know it. Yeah, it's called an ombudsman program. Even I'm having a hard time getting the pronunciation out. Okay, and then another best practice is office housework. So a colleague of mine, Ruchika Tulsian, wrote an article in, I believe it's also Harvard Business Review, about how certain people within the workplace are delegated more office housework. And office housework is defined as the non-glamorous work. So the work that's not necessarily connected to promotions or, getting to the next level. It's often like the work that is thankless in a lot of ways, right? They're the ones ordering lunches, making sure they're taking meeting minutes. And it's been statistically shown to be given to a lot of women of color, and often others that are in marginalized groups. So by making sure that we alternate office housework, we're not putting it on one group who in turn loses out on access and opportunities, which can lead to promotions for them or promotional opportunities. Okay, so the savior complex. So a couple of us brought this up in the first class. The savior complex is the idea that we have to try to save people and we have to try to create solutions for them because they don't have their own solutions. No, it is a dangerous way to approach this work, and it's present in a lot of our industries, from philanthropy to nonprofit to so on and so forth. A good way to challenge this is to remember that our role is to stand beside or behind a marginalized group and not in front of a marginalized group. The minute you're speaking for a group that you're not a part of, you're no longer practicing allyship. I have a wonderful one-pager of allyship that I created, so I'm happy to share that with you. It's a free resource. It's on my website that's coming out soon, but I can share that with you following this class, and it explains this concept. And, coming back to different identities, we've seen this. People with disabilities are often told that they're inspirational. Seniors are often told that they're dependents and they're not valued for the wisdom they bring. Some of us may be familiar with the term Orientalism, which is a concept that the West sees any place outside of the Western Hemisphere as somewhere over there and they need to be saved. Sometimes there's the savior complex around Indigenous people and how they need to be saved, and they're a figment of the past. We even see it with homelessness, and we see it with the veteran community, right? Like, we have policies that are baked in that say we need to help. We don't need to help anyone. I challenge that. I say we just need to create access and opportunity for people to create policies and practices on an organizational level that allows them to have a fair chance at success. Okay, a great quote by Martin Luther King Jr. It's all right to tell a man to lift himself up by his own bootstraps, but it is cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. So again, the point here is bootless. If you don't have the boots, what are you supposed to lift yourself up by? So again, when you do this work, lean into the quotes because somebody has before me or you made a point of this and we want to give credit to that. All right, so one of the most powerful slides in this session is a chart that was created by Harvey J. Coleman. I credited it here at the bottom. Harvey Coleman came up with this pie chart and says success in the workplace is based on 3 areas. And in his opinion, 10% is performance, 30% is image, and 60% is exposure. Not everybody agrees with this. I don't know if I agree with this fully, but it definitely gets us thinking differently. It shifts the conversation. As early as 2014, if you looked up articles on how to get promoted, there was a slew of suggestions, including take initiative, show passion for your work, show confidence, be a team player. We're slowly seeing us getting rid of these pieces of advice of leaning in and doing more of what other groups are doing and understanding that a lot of marginalized groups are doing everything right. We just need to create the policies and practices for them to have that access. Okay, so here again, I wanted to share some best practices with you. What I've done here is I've written out 3 programs, but I've underlined the tools. So when we get into our breakout rooms, you can think about this a little bit more, but here's an example. Program number 1, if I wanted to create a program that increases exposure of marginalized groups, I would say a selection of stretch projects and impactful projects using a STAR or SWOT matrix. So a STAR or SWOT matrix is a criteria that people can fill out, so it's not just left to our subjective measures. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And SWOT stands for strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And part of program 1 is to measure the input and output impacts. So you're not just measuring what comes out of something, you're measuring what people are putting into something. Program number 2, a practice of regular meetings with managers. So again, manager, skip manager, and job shadowing to rooms of influence and networks of influence. So again, organizational policies and practices. And then program number 3, a budget to participate in learning and development opportunities and language change from soft skills to power skills. So often in the workplace, we hear things like collaboration and, curiosity is soft skills. They're not soft skills. More and more, we're calling them power skills. So our language plays a role in all of this. Okay, and then the last piece I wanted to share with you before we get into the breakout rooms is about scarcity versus abundance. A good way to think about this is scarcity mindset is a mindset that there is one pie, and if I get a piece, then there's one less piece for Tony. Tony, I see you on the screen there. So it's either me or Tony. It's not both of us. Whereas an abundance mindset is the mindset that if I take a piece or if Tony takes a piece, then there will be another piece created for everybody. And I share this because I think that when we share this piece, credit to Jared Barnes, I think this really resonates with leaders that say, oh my gosh, this isn't about being scared of doing this work. We want to invest in this work because it's just going to grow more for everybody. We're going to get more profit, more growth. The organization is going to do better, and so on and so forth. And the one best practice that comes up for me is get rid of stack ranking. Show of hands if I can just see in the chat. Does anybody know, yes or no, what stack ranking is? Chantel, I see your hand up. There may be others. I may not be able to see you. So yeah, yes, Monica, thank you. Yes, yes. Okay, so I'm seeing some no's. Stack ranking is a practice where when it comes time to do promotional reviews, somebody came up, I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't know who, but came up with this idea that certain people are performing above the ideal and some people are performing below the ideal. And this is problematic because let's say you have an exceptional team of performers. because you've been introduced this concept of stack ranking as a manager, you may say, oh, well, I gave, Chantel, I see you on my screen, a high ranking, therefore I have to give a low ranking to somebody else. And a lot of people end up getting low rankings for a reason that has nothing to do with their performance. A lot of organizations have done this because they want to maintain an approximate statistic of 10% attrition, which is loss of the company to keep an organization fresh. But in my opinion, this is not the way to do it, because the people who get dinged are the ones that don't have access and opportunity. So I would definitely start your conversations with what is going on from a stack ranking promotional perspective and remove anything that does not give people a fair opportunity to show the value of their work. Okay. Yes, Veronica, I see here in some organizations we call calibration. Yes, calibration is another way to look at it. There's different terms for it, but we often see it in the classroom too, where some instructors may say, hey, I can't give a good job to everybody, so I'm going to rank everybody. In principle, it can make sense, I guess, but in practice, if we look at it in the context of bias and understanding that organizations have bias, you can begin to understand who ends up getting hurt as a process. All right, so this is a great quote by Gregory Mansfield. I encourage you to check him out. He is a disability advocate on Twitter. As a disabled person, my access shouldn't be dependent on your approval. I just really appreciate his content because he constantly reminds people who follow him that this is not about this isn't a negotiable. Like our dignity is not charity, right? We're not doing it because we are trying to do the right thing. We should be rooted in equity, whether we agree with it or not. Okay, so we're going to our exercise. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, our case study is Accenture. Accenture is one of many companies who has started and scaled a return to work program with a focus on mothers to ensure they have an in back into the workplace. Great program, but I wonder who else we can extend these programs to. So I'd love to put you into breakout rooms, and for about 10 or 12 minutes, think about that pie model, right? So 60% was exposure. And think about how we can give less advice about improving individual performance and more advice on creating organizational exposure in the workplace. And in your groups, I ask that you brainstorm one policy or practice to create access for marginalized communities. It's up to you which marginalized community you want to focus on, but remember, if we create for the margins, we're creating for everybody. And, try to have people speak that perhaps haven't had a chance to speak before. And one mistake on my side was that I didn't ask you to delegate somebody to share. So if you could do that this time, and then we'll come back and have more time this time around for each group to briefly share that one policy and practice. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. So the first slide said I guess the small group was about Accenture, and
yes.
they were working on how to bring women back into the workforce. But this one says that I'm just unsure like how the two are related. So developing the policy around for marginalized groups, is the marginalized group the women returning to the workforce?
Sure. So this slide is an example of a policy or practice that has been created for a marginalized group, in this case, return to work mothers. What I want us to do is take this idea and then create our own idea with any marginalized group. It could be, people with disabilities or learning disabilities, perhaps, that is not, or perhaps the trans community. So this is just an example of something, and then now I'd like you to create your own example. An example when we share back could be a return to work program, but we don't have to, that was just an example. So I'll be more clear on that in the next session so that, it's not confusing.
Got it, thank you.
Of course. All right. So let me get you into the breakout rooms. I'm going to do 10 like we usually do. Enjoy. And I would love to hear what you come back with. So we'll come back in about 10 minutes. 10 breakout rooms. Here you go. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I want to hear from you, but I think I want to start off with a language change. There's something I have been thinking about, and that's the term marginalized. As you know, DEI work is about constantly evolving our language. Language is a tool, and it's important to see how it can place value and also devalue different communities. I think that we can make the move from marginalized to underserved communities. So you're going to start seeing that change. And if you think that there's another change that we can make that even more accurately defines the communities that we are trying to center, please let me know, and we can see what we can do with that. But in short, the term marginalized implies that people are defined by where they are in terms of, our society and our workplaces, but it's not giving them agency. But when we use the term underserved, then we're putting the responsibility on organizations and those with privilege to give them the access and opportunity. So following this class, that's something I'm going to do. Okay, group one, I would love to hear your one policy practice idea for how we can create access for underserved communities. Did you have somebody that you delegated?
Hi, this is Shar. I can speak for Group 7, I think we were. We talked about just some of our experiences with non-visible disabilities. So folks that may have a learning disability. I had an experience with an employee, as well as others on my team in my group, where the employee had ADHD but did not disclose it until performance became an opportunity. And we worked with him to figure out what was his needs and what was required for him to be successful in the role, and the different things that we had to put in place to help him be successful. And I know Ruby had some thoughts on this as well, because she was the one who brought that up. But we talked about a policy that would be open and transparent for non-visible disabilities, that would educate leaders on what to look for, because oftentimes when there's a performance issue, it is usually referred to as skill versus will, where it could be further from that. It could be a non-visible disability or an opportunity or lack of resources or tools for them to be successful. And from a policy perspective, educating leaders as well as educating employees and creating that safe space where they can be open to share their disabilities rather than hide them and hope that they don't surface while they're in the job or doing the job. And I'll just ask if Ruby had anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like we mentioned, the making sure that we're using the words that are inclusive. We looked up like some of the titles that were used for invisible disabilities, which is very commonly found in the if you look it up on Google. And then we decided non-visible disabilities. Of course, it matters, and how we talked about how we can make that a safe place, right, for team members to come to you. I also think it's part of the onboarding process, adding it to the onboarding process, talking about the policy in itself, making it available to all team members that come into the workforce, into your team, and then creating that safe space for letting new team members know that if this is something that resonates with them or connects with them or something that could help them, to please come to their immediate manager, so that there's a whole system that can be put in place for them.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing and for centering the non-visible disability community. I really appreciate what you said about co-creating with the community. Co-creation is so important because we're not imposing solutions on different communities. We're working with them, creating resources or accessibility services that are available to all. I would even challenge us to say, instead of somebody going to their manager, what if they were to fill out a form that perhaps it's a ticketing system or something that allows them to not have to go through their manager, and more baked into the process. So excellent suggestions here. Another group, would you like to volunteer? We have about 9 groups, and I want to also go through the assignment and the module project. So yeah, 1 suggestion per group would be wonderful. Thank you, Shar, by the way. Fatima, did you want to share from your group?
Yes, thank you. We were group 8, and one policy we talked about for almost any group would be to increase workplace flexibilities, such as telework or hybrid work environments. We cited the research around how underserved, marginalized, whatever term we're using, how those communities have enjoyed almost a reprieve from the workplace, and it felt more productive and even more engaged when they have been in a remote environment, less visible, so to speak, less microaggressions. And so extending those workplace flexibilities, whether that is the number of days that they're in the office or even how they break up their workday or their weekends. And in addition to that, providing the resources needed in order to accomplish that work, such as better equipment or certain software, IT support, and technical training to help, particularly Julia cited, our aging workforce adapt to new technologies.
Oh, excellent. Absolutely. The hybrid work model is choice, right? It's based on choice. And again, studies have shown that people from underserved communities do not necessarily want to rush back into the workplace. They experience microaggressions very often, and they want to just be able to be themselves. Okay, Tony, up to you. Sorry, you're next.
Hi, yes, okay. So group 1, we discussed our equity seeking group would be Black women, and our policy within the workplace would be to incentivize mentorship and sponsorship. So baking that into the expectations and performance review of the C-suite leaders so that they know what the company is expecting in regards to inclusive workplaces, and they would then be required to sponsor someone or mentor them. And we made a distinction between mentoring and sponsorship. Mentoring is someone or we would hope would be more of an affinity with that person. So someone that looks like you, speaks like you, something you share with them in common. So when they can take you through their onboarding, but you feel comfortable speaking to them with regards to what's happening in the workplace. Sponsorship could be someone who does not look like you, but is bringing you along, bringing you to the table, bringing you in those spaces for exposure. We discussed how in that pie model, exposure was 68%, and how Black women oftentimes are not brought into those spaces, so then we are not offered those promotional opportunities. So having both sponsorship and mentorship could help to bring more Black women from entry level into the C-suite leadership.
Thank you.
Hope I did our group well.
Oh, I have no doubt, Tony. There was a great article that came out recently specifically speaking to the experiences of Black women in the workplace in relation to how sponsorship is such an important part of this. We're going to go into that more into the next class, but what you said about baking it into the performance reviews of leaders sets an expectation through policies and practice. Therefore, if they don't do that, then perhaps they get a ding on their performance review, as in you brought in this much profitability, you did this, but there is a specific box there. So I especially appreciate that point. Devin, for your group, did you want to share?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It was group 5. So we talked about a few things. The underserved group we chose to focus on was the immigrant or refugee population. And something we talked about was around cultural appreciation and learning experiences. And so what would it look like to create spaces for compensated cultural appreciation learning experiences to other parts of the organization in a way that facilitates belonging, but also really appreciates what folks who are not from the dominant class in an organization can bring to the organization, whether it's work specific or out of work. And then aligning that with alternate work schedules for cultural holidays. And so if there's an amount of time that folks are able to take off in a year, if you don't celebrate those holidays, what does it look like for you to work remote or work differently and have that equitable across the system?
Excellent. A group that we don't often give much policy to. There is a wonderful practice that started in Canada called the Skills Passport, and it's an actual passport. I think it's virtual now, or I'm not sure how it works exactly now. I'm familiar with it from a couple of years ago, but it's the idea that you get a stamp for a lot of the experiences you go through from moving to another country, learning a different language, getting your credentials, and you show it to employers who in turn can no longer argue your experiences. And another piece was bereavement policy. There's a lot of organizations who give a certain number of days that are based on dominant group practices. But I learned, as we all are in the process of learning, that, for example, a woman from an Indigenous group told me that for her, they don't even start the bereavement the bereavement process until they go through a certain number of prayers. So she said, the 3-day policy is not inclusive of my community at all. And you can see how this varies from different community to different community. So again, I love the way you all are thinking. This is just excellent. Monica, I see that you're up next on my hand raise screen.
Hi. This is, I guess, kind of a similar segue, and I appreciate my group because we kind of workshop something that I'm experiencing in my business right now. But we were thinking about people who are either maybe potentially it's definitely inclusive of first generation or immigrants, first or second generation, but also specifically people who are the first in their family to attend college and kind of embark on a career path like this. And I'm experiencing that there's a huge learning curve, lots of questions, whether it's vocab, different means of communication, just really business basics. And so creating a safe space for people to ask questions and ask a lot of questions, and also learn from maybe someone else in the organization that they may not have exposure to. So whether that's lunch and learns or kind of like one-on-one mentorship relationships. And that's also inclusive of like some of the like systems that are, like benefits and 401k are also a completely different language. So helping them get up to speed with that.
Yeah, another fantastic suggestion. Instead of getting people the onus on the person to ask, creating that space so that people can drop in. An example, maybe office hours or community roundtables, or the resources are there for them to use as they need it. And something as simple as offering something in different languages, or even the person navigating those resources as a person from their community is also helpful. Just having that space is not enough. Who is navigating those spaces can make a difference as to the questions that people ask. So thank you so much for sharing. Monique?
Group 2 representative, if I miss anything, please add that we were looking at particularly the workplace accommodations around folks and persons who are disabled. And we were saying in terms of if we were to create policies for the margins, but acknowledging that would allow also for benefits to working parents, no matter your gender or your status. And so some of the ideas that came out of that was getting rid of return to work policies, getting rid of productivity reports, particularly moving beyond the measuring for productivity versus presence, even moving beyond presence and going to contribution. And so encouraging employers to measure contribution versus productivity versus presence. And also being thoughtful around these on-off camera policies when people are in their homes and the intrusion that brings to the different people, and being thoughtful around how we show up. I hope I capture what my team members were saying. If not, feel free to add.
Monique, thank you. I'm so glad you brought up working parents. I think we can even extend this a little bit further to caregivers, because in a lot of communities that are underserved, families are not defined as nuclear, and so elders may play a role, and a lot of us may be part of a sandwich generation where we take care of people who are older or younger, and so offering that those benefits to caregivers as opposed to parents is really helpful. And yes, to on-off camera policy, absolutely. Productivity. There's a great new practice of measuring input impacts. We spoke about this earlier versus output, and it's the idea that instead of just placing emphasis on what comes out of something, see what goes into something, whether that's your time or your resources, your energy, because not every space has that linear output as others do, especially in the DEI space. And a great group that can benefit from this are employee resource groups. Instead of looking at the measure of impact we have, that's long-term community-driven work. We can look at what they're putting into it, how many people join ERGs, how it's grown, the development around that with more and more people connecting with different communities. So wonderful. Liana?
Hi, so I'm from group 6, and if I leave out anything, please, anyone from group 6, speak up. So we spoke about the trans community, and something that my job started implementing, which was really powerful, I feel, was that for those transitioning and wanting to change, there's on Slack, now that a lot of companies use Slack, and wanted to change their Slack name, previous to the newer policy that we implemented, you had to go through like HR, your manager, like the help team, you had to go through a lot of different teams in order to get your name changed, just because there was a lot of like legal things, I guess, that they had to change on their end, but the process has been streamlined now so that it's way easier. So all the person has to do is just email in and have their manager CC'd and email into the help team, and just let them know like, hey, I would like to change my name to X. Like, when can we get this done? And that's just an easier, way less intrusive process to getting their new identity represented.
Yeah, one mistake we see in the workplace is, we'll change it so long as you ask for it. But when you streamline the process, then you're lifting the individual work off the person, which in fact slows down the process, right? Like, we all know this. Our biggest commodity right now is time. So if we're asking people to create safety for themselves by putting the onus on them, it's likely not going to happen. But when we create the policies, the impact is more likely to be there. I have a full page, so this is going to be a tip sheet. Thank you so much for everything that you all shared. This was excellent. Dominique, I see your hand up. Is this for the group? Did you get a chance to speak?
Yes, this is for the group.
Great. Yes, please share.
I have no idea what group number we were.
Okay. But it's all the same question. I realize that. So
myself, KG, and Dr. Dunlap, essentially we basically covered the same thing that Tony's group mentioned. We focused specifically on people of color and sponsorship. So not quite mentorship and sponsorship, but making sure that people of color are matched when coming in at entry level, match them with either a mid-level or a senior level staff person for sponsorship and exposure opportunities.
Thank you. Yes, matching, absolutely. I was just thinking when I heard all of you speak, I think one of the most, if we find barriers, and we'll go into that in our project for this session, one of the lowest lift, highest impact practices that we can put in place is transparency transparency around wages. Knowledge is power. So when we make it a policy to share what, number one, like how much the job is getting paid, number two, what the band is for that role, and then number three, where somebody is percentage wise. So let's say the band is from 40 to 50, and you find out, Monique, you're on my screen, so I'm just going to use your name here. Monique's at a 67% of that bandwidth. That gives people an idea of where they are and what they need to advocate for. So these are all excellent, and I would preface this by saying wage equity is one of the most important pieces we can do in the workplace. After all, we are there to make money. We are there to support our families, and that should not be a negotiable. So thank you, everybody. We have 2 assignments this week. Number 1 is assignment number 4. It's detailed here, but imagine 2 employees, same credentials, working equally as hard and producing the same quality of work. So not the same work, the same quality of work. One had more exposure than the other and got promoted. So similar to what you did in your brainstorms, list 1 tool or technique you would use to ensure the other employee got the exposure they needed. And then how would you scale this? So, something, I'm not looking for anything too detailed from you, as I've seen you exhibit this in your groups, but something that will give me an insight into how you're thinking on an organizational systems level. If you want to use the example from your group, that's perfectly fine. If I see that more than once, I don't have a problem with that at all. So that is that assignment. I do appreciate, the shorter ones, so thank you for that. And then the module project. Basically, the first 4 classes are on awareness, and then our next 4 classes will be on accountability, and our last 4 classes will be in action. This is the module project for this, for these 4 classes that you're a part of. I am inviting you to use your organization as an example, or if you click on the link that you'll see here, there's an organization that I've created. And all I'm looking for you to do is identify 1 strength, 1 weakness, 1 opportunity, 1 threat. That's the SWOT matrix. And then 1 tool or technique for each of them that can support what that SWOT matrix shows. So for example, if your strength is, we have people of different races, then the tool or technique would be to create a community roundtable so everybody has a chance to come together and co-create. Something like that. I again want you to start thinking about what realistically happens within organizations and how we can create policies and practices to make sure that this work is being done. We didn't have a chance to get to Q&A, so I apologize for that, but I think we did have a great conversation here. I saw a great exchange of ideas. I will follow up with a tip sheet. Just bottom line, very quickly, and then I'll let you go. We should be creating access before rewarding meritocracy. Meritocracy is the idea that everyone's rewarded for their work, but we have to create access before that. Number 2, people don't need to be saved, they need access. So 3 things: create opportunities, remove barriers, and policies and practice. And last, I just wanted to end with a quote by a woman I greatly admire, Arlen Hamilton. If you don't know her, please look her up. She is a venture capitalist, a Black queer woman. Be a key maker, not a gatekeeper. Very, very strong quote. I encourage you to use it. And these are some additional resources. And next week we will be talking. So just a reminder, there's no class on Thursday. And then when we meet on Tuesday, we will be speaking about why it's crucial to have someone in your career corner. This is an article I wrote, but we will be diving deeper into mentorship and sponsorship. So thank you for those of you that brought that up. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go be with my family now. I hear my little kid in the background, but take care of yourselves. And any conversations we didn't get to have, we will definitely continue them in the classroom chat and on the Discord channel. I do know one person wanted to ask me a quick question, so if you want to stay, we can just quickly discuss that. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Quick question before you get to her. How do we get to that Discord channel? I know that was asked earlier. Is it in an email somewhere or someplace that was missed?
Let me see if I can drop the link in here. So I'm already logged in. For those of you that are not logged in, are you able to open that and get access to our conversations?
I can try. I was having trouble with my password. Like I created a password and it's just not recognizing it. So I asked them for some tech support. But I think there was an invite to this channel.
Yeah.
It was sent to our emails before the class started, which is how I knew to enroll.
Veronica, was that you? Sorry, I didn't see who was speaking. Was that you speaking?
Yes, it's Veronica.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for detailing that. Yes, there was an email sent out and it would have prompted you to set up a calendar password. I will ask the elevator team to resend it for those of you who have not had a chance to.
Tony put it in the chat too, the invite.
I saw that. Well, Tony, thank you for sharing. That's helpful.
Thanks for asking me that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I know you have to go. I was just curious around equity and with training and development. I just thought it was interesting. The number that you quoted or the example you gave, I was just curious if that's for every single employee, like agnostic of their title at where I work. Actually, within my own department, it's kind of crazy, but the higher your title, the larger the budget for your professional development, which to me is like not an example of equity, but I was just curious if the example you gave, if that's afforded to everyone. It's like equal access or equal opportunity.
So this definitely varies from organization to organization. I think that's, in my experience, that's a starting number for some of the larger corporate companies, and then it goes up from there. From my understanding, there's like a number or a budget given to everybody, and then if you want more than that, it's looked at as on a case-to-case basis. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I would definitely challenge what your organization is doing, because if they're giving more to people who already have the access, how are they supporting those who don't have the access, right?
Right. And it's not all bad. I mean, they are paying for this course. I include this course fit into the budget allocated to my level, so I am taking it. But just wanted to ask that question. So thank you so much for staying on to answer that. Great.
Yes, of course, Veronica. Take care, and we'll see you next Thursday.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye.
First. Tony, I know you had a question too, but if there's anybody else that quickly wanted to ask.
Yeah, I did. It's Kathleen here.
Hi, Kathleen.
I just had a quick question. I have started a new job the day I started this course. So I'm playing catch up. Is it okay if over the weekend I finish up my work for the first 4 classes?
So Kathleen, I think somebody asked this in the office hours. I don't know if you heard, but I'm marking the people who submitted their assignments in first, and then with any time I have left over, I will go back and mark those with the help of the elevator team. And the first 3 are optional, so the marks that you get don't actually go towards the credit. The mandatory ones do. And so far, the mandatory ones are going to be this week's assignment and this week's module project. So it's really up to you if you would like to do option 1 to 3. I did make that optional, so it doesn't count towards that final mark, and you don't get dinged for it at all. It's not seen as incomplete. But whether or not I get to it, that would be dependent on if I'm able to finish the other ones first.
Okay, but the mandatory ones, so there's no class Thursday?
There's no class Thursday, correct.
Okay, and the mandatory ones, those are the ones that that's the ones that you just gave us?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll come onto the classroom and reiterate that, because I think there's been a little bit of confusion, but so far the first 3 are not mandatory. They do not go towards your grade. or the course certificate. The fourth one, this one will. And I will be giving feedback to 10 people. The rest will just be getting a grade. I hope that
Okay. Okay, yes, thank you.
Of course.
Hi. So I did have a question. I'll hold it till your office hours next Tuesday, as I said. But the woman or person you quoted earlier, Arlen, what's their last name?
Arlen Hamilton.
Okay.
Yeah. She is the founder of Backstage Capital. It's a venture capitalist firm in Silicon Valley. Phenomenal story. She wrote a book called, I think it's called sorry, I really want to look it up and give you the right name because I think it's called How to Turn Being Underestimated into Your Greatest Disadvantage. But even if you just follow her on social media, she's wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, Tony. Take care. Have a great evening and a great weekend.
You as well. Bye.